Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy, healthy start to this nice Wednesday after a good old dumpola session as Bitcoin trades about $2,500 down from yesterday's high, of which there is a lot to be following up on today as the sort of rubble clears. So now that we've had that event kind of cleared the way, now is the actual fun part. And of course, we have another event, well, I think even today or maybe tomorrow, that's going to be the merge. And then an even more fun event next week with the FOMC meeting. But for now, there is plenty to discuss actually on the short-term timeframes, which then can lead into the higher-term timeframe analysis and a few higher-term timeframe setups that are actually coming to fruition probably within this next 5 to 10 day period. Anyways, other than that, I wanted to once again shill subtly, or maybe not so subtly, my my Instagram. I've been uploading a lot of trading and Bitcoin related content there, which you can find in the link in the description below. All right, sweet. Let's just jump right into it right here and start it off with the short-term time frame. So Bitcoin sells off after the CPI data, of course, and then what do we get? Well, we get a nice major move to the downside, and Bitcoin now sitting at about the $20,000 region on CME, or just above $20,000 you could say. Anyways, in the short-term timeframes, there are a few things to be aware of. Now, after a big dump bull like this, I want to be referencing a couple of things. 1 4-hour BBWP, we can see that it's reached extremes once and very likely going for a second time over here. So to me, or at least traditionally speaking, that is a time to be looking for a bit of a mean reversion play. In this case, at very minimum sideways and perhaps a little bit of a bounceola. So can we find any other confluential factors to that? Well, we do see a phantom drive of hidden bullish evidence over here, although I don't trust it all that much in this case. But if we actually zoom out a little bit and put on a Fibonacci retracement from the high to the low of this current rally, then the 618 comes in exactly at about $20,000, a little bit above there to be fair, which is, essentially the current low. So, we might be seeing something like this, maybe a few more drives into it, maybe even slightly below it, but probably does try for a bit of a rally in the short term after that. When we go in reference, of course, stochastic momentum on the short-term timeframes, not on the 2-day timeframe, but on the short-term timeframes like the hourly, we do see that it's actually popping up above the moving average for the first time, getting out of the critical zone. It will be remaining with upside posture as long as Bitcoin's above 20,100. The bi-hourly also about the same thing, I believe. Yes, indeed it is. Although very, very weak down here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, 20,200 going to be the pivot on this. So very likely we're looking at a bit of sideways. And then if we even go to the 4-hour time frame, it's still nosediving here, but in some critical regions. Now, keep in mind the pivot for this current closure is 21,500, so probably not turning up on this next one, which is why I do say it's most likely to trade a little bit sideways here and then maybe try for a bit of a bounce. So the question is, what would actually matter on a bounce? Well, first things first, there's no talk, or at least in my opinion, there's no talk of any sort of bullish, a bear trap leading into a bullish, continuation to the upside, as long as Bitcoin's below essentially the major breakdown region yesterday, which is coming in around that 21,500-ish region right here on any sort of meaningful time frame. Other than that, any sort of a bounce below about 21.8 is just, another lower high. So that does give a bit of free enterprise for the short term for Bitcoin to, bounce up a little bit if it wants. I think 20,550 is completely fair game. Even $21,000 is not too far out of the question there, but ultimately be aware of this region right here, because as long as Bitcoin's below there, it's just another lower high and really not, at least in my opinion, that interesting as far as any sort of sustained upside comes. Now above this region, then yes, we can start to talk about targets probably back towards 24,500 to 25,000 bucks. I think it's a lot lower probability, as we'll discuss soon enough, but this is only the short-term timeframes for right now. So again, short-term timeframes, bit of sideways, probably tries for a bit of a bounce, but here's where we get into the more fun stuff. So let's now go into the slightly higher time frames. In this case, we'll start off with a 6 hour, one last thing on the 4-hour time frame over here. You'll notice all these red circles on the charts and a bit of a LARP line. Obviously, that one's already played out, so I'm going to get rid of it because it's just not relevant towards what we're talking about. But these red circles over here, they correlate to the same trend line on the 4-hour RSI, kind of governing those bullish divergence drives that we've seen from the 22nd of August, the 29th of August, and then again more recently on the 7th of September, exactly a week ago. So does the 4-hour RSI, do something like this where maybe it tries for initial bounce, then comes down and tests around that? Probably yes. And does it probably try for a greater bounce somewhere around there? Yes. Would that imply that Bitcoin goes lower? Yes. So again, looking at this $20,000 region right here, if you do see a closure on a 4-hour time frame below there, I would be looking for Bitcoin to put in a nice little dump extension somewhere around 19,300 to 19,450 or so, and then probably look for another short-term bounce right there. Again, short-term bounce, not the same thing to be confused as a higher time frame bounce or let alone a fucking reversal. But that would be my sort of criteria for that. All right, sweet. So let's now get into the sort of medium time frames, and then we'll go over into the higher term time frames and put all the puzzle pieces together as best as we can. So in this case, the 6-hour time frame, still no sign as far as stochastic momentum goes. The pivot is currently 22,700. So unlikely, quite unlikely that we'll see that one turn up at least in the next period. That number will obviously come down following that, but then we go into the 12-hour, and the 12-hour is also showing downside momentum as long as Bitcoin is below 22,550. So crossing in the critical region like this again does give me cause for concern that any sort of a short-term rally is likely just that, a short-term rally attempt with downside to follow after that. And then moving on over into the daily, we did identify yesterday that, hey, the daily pivot is actually still even below 19,000 bucks. But the problem with this is that the stochastic will continue to move up here, doing something like this, letting it essentially reset, maybe even getting close to the bullish control zone. And then this number over here, the pivot point on it, will naturally go higher. And if it starts to work its way up to current price action, assuming that the short-term timeframes do eventually give way to the downside, then we'll just get essentially a bearish reset coming back down here and something like that for the actual move to the downside, which probably would start next week if I had to guess. I mean, we have events, and then also when we're going to go to the 5-day over here, that will also kind of pull the picture together. So I did make a grave mistake yesterday on the 5-day time frame analysis, which I feel very, very bad about, because these are things that I should be more patient with. So this is my bad in this case. But the 5-day time frame stochastic momentum oscillator did not cross the upside. It was very close. It was incredibly close, and visually, I couldn't actually make the difference in that case. But if I do reference the number at the top left-hand corner, you can see that it was ever so slightly below in terms of the K below the D. So that means that we actually did not see a cross the upside yesterday, thus essentially saying that, well, this signal is still active as of right now. And it will be active as long as Bitcoin's below where? Hey, 21,800. So again, coming in around that last major pivot region, about 21.5 to 21.8 region. Anything below there is still, well, dare I say, not enticing for any long-term upside gains. So in this case, I want to once again reiterate the criteria for this signal, and then speak about perhaps ways to confirm the next major leg down if that is indeed going to happen. So first and foremost, what is the signal? It's a 5-day BBWP, which represents volatility, aka the dispersion of returns, versus stochastic momentum. Anyways, in this case, the 5-day BBWP getting to extreme lows, which are defined as anything towards 15 percentile or lower, as you can see many iterations in the past 4 to 5 years, has led to an average move after that of about 42.35% over the course of just under 37 days. And the stochastic momentum oscillator has actually been thus far, and I don't expect this to always be the case, obviously, but thus far been perfect in getting the direction of the volatility expansion. And of course, it got it even again on this last one over here. It turned to the downside as Bitcoin did initially then move from just above 25,000 bucks all the way down to our current lows of 18,500. But here's the thing. With yesterday's move, 5-day BBWP is actually still expanding over here above the moving average, both of them having a positive slope. So I think that is a good indication that, one, the signal is still viable, and then two, more important, or just as important, the 5-day stochastic momentum oscillator typically denotes when the move is actually ending by crossing in the opposite direction. And while yesterday I did think that it was doing that, which I was wrong about, it did not. And so this would also suggest that, hey, this move is still in the cards here. And we can even draw like a trend line regression over here for these last few rejections going all the way back to September 2021, which you could even identify as another rejection of this region as well. So this signal is still viable as long as Bitcoin's below that pivot point on 5-day stochastic momentum. And the 5 days doesn't close for another 3 days. So, there's a lot of time left. Anyways, from that signal given to where we're at right now, it has been 30 days. 30 days. 30 days if I measure it, depending upon where I start it. But I'm going to go with a less lenient of it. You could even say you could say that it's 35, but I would say probably better to go with the less lenient interpretation of this. So 30 days. Does that put us within the average days of this? I mean, yeah, definitely within the ballpark, but we could definitely expect this to take another 5 to 10 days to play out. And then, of course, when we look at the first standard deviation of what we expect 68% of the results to be in between, 35% basically to 49.5%. And thus far, we have seen a pretty great move to the downside from that signal given. That was about 27%. So again, kind of puts us within the ballpark, not within the first standard deviation, but probably very likely within the second standard deviation. But if we were to go for the bottom end of the first standard deviation, I'm curious where that would kind of plot Bitcoin at if we were to see the next leg down. And of course, that would put Bitcoin at about the mid $15,000 region. So here's the thing. That's not like my fucking target for right now, to be 100% abundantly clear. That is only my target if and when Bitcoin does break below the current lows on a higher time frame closing basis. Until then, these sort of areas are just fraught with peril in my experience. And so I'm only looking at short-term timeframes for my own trading. In fact, I pretty much only trade short-term timeframes in the more recent times. But in this case right here, what's like a hard number that would actually be relevant for calling continuation down to those sort of $15,500 to $16,000 regions. It'd be with a daily closure anywhere below about 18,700, it looks like. Yeah, about 18,700 would do it. If I'm using a 4-hour, I'd need to see a lower low than what we did see back on over on the 7th of September on a closing basis. Again, all this being done on CME. So in this case, again, still going to take some time, obviously. And I suppose the real Boolah hopium is that, Bitcoin grinds it out sideways here, puts in a bounce, and then that bounce gets you back above 21.5, let's say. Until then, I am looking at any bounces, just that, a bounce before continuation lower. So I think that's a good place to leave off on this particular video. I want to be wishing you the best as always. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully soon.